2 hours ago, a Congressional Budget Office preliminary assessment crossed the desks of 17 Republican senators simultaneously. The document was not classified. It was not leaked. It was a routine fiscal impact report, the kind that gets produced quietly and read quietly and filed quietly in most circumstances. But the number on the cover page of this particular report is not a number that can be read quietly. $214 billion. That is the confirmed expenditure figure for the first 32 days of Operation Epic Fury, not the projected cost, not the worst-case scenario. The actual documented 32-day cost of a conflict that the White House described at its outset as a precise, targeted, and time-limited military operation. $214 billion in 32 days. For context, the entire annual budget of the United States Department of Education is $68 billion. The entire annual budget of the Department of Transportation is $105 billion. America has spent in 32 days double the annual cost of educating its children on a war that a significant and growing portion of the Republican base has concluded was not America's war to fight, and the country that wanted this war, the country that lobbied for it, the country that framed the intelligence that justified it, the country whose prime minister was on the phone with Trump for 48 hours before the first strike package was authorized, is not the country writing the checks. Israel wanted this war. America is paying for it. And the base is no longer quiet about the difference. This is not a story that originated in the opposition. It is a story that is being told in increasing volume and with increasing specificity by the voters, the commentators, and now the elected officials who form the structural foundation of Trump's political coalition. The anger is not abstract. It is arithmetic. 13 American service members dead. $214 billion spent. A conflict with no visible endpoint, no formal declaration of victory, and no negotiated settlement in sight. And on the other side of the ledger, an Israeli government that has achieved its primary strategic objective, the degradation of Iran's nuclear program and the elimination of its supreme leadership, without losing a single American dollar from its own treasury or a single Israeli soldier to the ground combat phase that American forces have been absorbing. That asymmetry is not lost on the people who are being asked to keep funding it. To understand the full weight of what America has spent, you have to move beyond the headline number and into the human accounting that the fiscal report does not capture. The $214 billion represents munitions, logistics, fuel, operational maintenance, and the financial cost of sustained carrier strike group deployment in a high-intensity conflict environment. It does not represent the lifetime disability and healthcare costs for the American service members wounded in the conflict's opening phase, which the Veterans Affairs Actuarial Office has already begun modeling at figures that will add tens of billions to the long-term ledger. It does not represent the economic output lost in the communities that sent those 13 service members home in flag-draped caskets. It does not represent the cost to American families of the energy price increases that Hormuz disruption has generated, which the Energy Information Administration has calculated is running at approximately $80 per household per month in elevated fuel and heating costs. The $214 billion is the government's bill. The American people's bill is larger, more personal, and arriving in forms that do not show up in congressional budget assessments. But this is where it gets serious. Because the financial cost, as staggering as it is not the dimension of this story that is generating the most intense political heat inside the Republican coalition right now. That distinction belongs to the question of who decided this war was necessary, who constructed the argument that made it feel inevitable, and who is now bearing the consequences of that decision while the architect of the argument faces none of them. Netanyahu's role in the construction of the case for epic fury is now being examined with a scrutiny that the administration's communications apparatus has been visibly struggling to manage. The sequence is documented and not seriously disputed. In the 12 months preceding February 28, the Israeli government provided American intelligence agencies with a series of assessments concluding that Iran's nuclear timeline had accelerated dramatically, that enrichment at near weapons-grade levels was progressing faster than previously modeled, and that the window for military action that could permanently eliminate the program was closing. Those assessments drove the internal American debate toward military action in ways that alternative interpretations of the same underlying data did not. European intelligence agencies, working from much of the same technical evidence, reached notably less urgent conclusions about the timeline. The IAEA's own assessments were more measured, but the Israeli framing was the one that reached the Oval Office most directly, most repeatedly, and through the personal relationship channel that Netanyahu had spent years cultivating specifically for moments like this one. And what happened next is the part that the MAGA base is now processing with a fury that senior Republican political operatives describe as unlike anything they have managed before. The Abraham Accords architecture, as has now been widely documented, created a structural alignment between Israeli and American strategic priorities that made Netanyahu's framing of the Iranian threat feel like an American interest rather than an Israeli one. When Netanyahu told Trump that Iran was 6 weeks from a functional nuclear device and that the only president with the will to act was the one currently in office, that message landed inside a decision-making framework that had already been pre-configured to treat Israeli security imperatives as American security imperatives. The framework was not built overnight. It was built over 4 years of the first Trump term, through Kushner's personal relationship with Israeli officials, through the deliberate alignment of the Abraham Accords with Trump's political brand, and through the cultivation of a narrative in which Trump's legacy and Israeli security were inseparable. By the time the February phone call happened, the architecture for saying yes had been under construction for years. The architecture for saying no had been systematically dismantled. Tucker Carlson gave voice to what a growing portion of the base was already thinking when he said, without diplomatic hedging, that Netanyahu played Trump. Not that the relationship was complicated, not that the interests partially aligned, that Netanyahu, who has been navigating the intersection of Israeli survival and American political psychology for 30 years, identified Trump's specific vulnerabilities, his need for legacy, his response to the language of strength versus weakness, his personal loyalty to relationships cultivated over decades, and constructed a case for military action that was built precisely around those vulnerabilities. Carlson's audience did not push back. They amplified it, because the argument validates something they had been feeling but not saying, that the America First president was led into an Israel First war by a foreign leader who understood him better than he understood himself. The Netanyahu-Trump transactional dynamic has a specific financial dimension that is now circulating in conservative media and beginning to reach congressional offices. Israel receives approximately $3.8 billion annually in American military assistance. That figure has not been adjusted, reduced, or conditioned on Israeli cost sharing in the current conflict, despite the fact that the conflict was initiated on the basis of Israeli intelligence assessments, advances Israeli strategic objectives more directly than American ones, and is being funded almost entirely by American taxpayers. $3.8 billion in annual assistance flowing to the country that wanted the war, while $214 billion flows out of the American Treasury to fight it. Republican members of Congress from fiscal conservative districts are receiving constituent mail on this asymmetry in volumes that their offices describe as comparable to the peak of the Ukraine funding debate, with one critical difference. The Ukraine funding debate was a debate between Republicans and Democrats. This one is a debate inside the Republican coalition, between Trump loyalists who support the war and America First, conservatives who are questioning why Israel's strategic objectives are being purchased with American money and American lives. The congressional pressure is now structural rather than anecdotal. 13 Republican senators have privately communicated to White House Legislative Affairs that they cannot support a supplemental war funding package of the scale the administration is preparing to request without significant modifications to the cost-sharing framework. They are not threatening to vote against it publicly. They are communicating privately that their constituents will not absorb another major expenditure on a conflict that is increasingly described in their districts not as a defense of American interests, but as a subsidy for Israeli ones. The distinction matters politically because the supplemental package is coming to a floor vote before the August recess, which means the cost-sharing question will be live and public at the precise moment when the 2026 midterm primary calendar is beginning to focus minds. The American business community has added a corporate dimension to the political one. Defense contractors are benefiting. The broader industrial economy is not. The National Federation of Independent Business, which represents small and medium businesses rather than defense-adjacent corporations, has now twice issued statements calling for a rapid diplomatic resolution that stabilizes energy costs and supply chain availability. The American Farm Bureau has flagged that fertilizer costs, which are directly linked to natural gas prices that are elevated by Gulf disruption, are running at levels that threaten the viability of the spring planting season for operations that do not have the financial reserves to absorb sustained input cost increases. These are not defense industry voices. These are the voices of the small business owners, farmers, and independent operators who form the economic backbone of the communities that vote Republican in midterm elections, and they are telling their representatives that this war's costs are arriving in their balance sheets in ways that do not appear in the Pentagon's budget documents. Internationally, the cost asymmetry has produced reactions from American allies that compound the domestic political problem rather than relieving it. European governments that had been carefully neutral on the conflict's justification are now less carefully neutral on the question of burden sharing. The German Finance Ministry issued a statement noting that European energy consumers are absorbing significant costs from Gulf disruption without having been consulted on the military operation that caused it. France made a similar observation through its foreign ministry. The implicit message from both governments is the same. If American military action generates costs that are distributed across allied economies, allied governments have a legitimate interest in the decision-making that produces those costs, and the current arrangement in which decisions are made in Washington and Jerusalem and bills are paid in Washington, Berlin, Paris, and Tokyo is not sustainable as a permanent feature of the alliance architecture. Trump now faces a political situation in which the financial and human cost of the conflict is generating pressure from his own base, his own congressional coalition, his allied governments, and his domestic business community simultaneously, all converging on a single question that his current public narrative cannot answer without structural modification. If this war serves American interests, why is America paying for it alone? If this war serves Israeli interests primarily, why is the cost-sharing framework unchanged from peacetime? And if Netanyahu's intelligence assessments provided the primary justification for the operation, what is the appropriate accountability framework for a foreign leader whose framing of the threat drove a decision that has now cost $214 billion and 13 American lives? Israel wanted this war. America is paying the bill. And the base, which was told this president puts America first, is furious. Not at the war in the abstract, at the specific, documented, arithmetic reality that the country that lobbied hardest for the conflict is the country bearing the least of its cost. That furious arithmetic is now in 17 Republican senators' offices, in conservative media, in small business association statements, and in the constituent mail that is arriving at congressional offices at volumes that nobody in the West Wing anticipated and nobody currently has a clean answer for. 2 hours ago, the budget assessment confirmed a number that the administration had been hoping would not become a single, simple, politically lethal headline: $214 billion, 32 days, 13 lives. One war that Israel wanted and America fought. The bill is public now, the base has seen it. And the question that is moving through every Republican district in every swing state that will matter in November 2026 is the same question, asked in the language of kitchen tables and fuel receipts and flag-draped caskets. Who exactly is America first for?